You're welcome. This is a continuation of the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. We're a little bit late because the executive session went somewhat longer than we had anticipated, but now we're back and we're moving to the item of IT Modernization Fund and relevant projects.
So I had provided an update on all of the projects that have been funded through the last 2 years through efforts of individual project funding. But in the understanding the time, I would like to spend whatever you would like on the projects of interest. So if you have questions, I would rather dive into those than go through and use up your time on.
Well, the first questions that I have are relative to specific projects that were contained in the big bill that required Jitoc to review those projects vis-a-vis funding. And I'd like to just have an understanding of where those stand. I gathered that they were really the fiscal 23 projects of one kind or another. I don't know if any of them are at a point that those projects should be brought to our attention for any action. And if not, then just to get a rough idea as to when, and we don't need to go into the details of the projects.
Yeah. So the one that I'm aware of is the ERP project. That is the one that we were supposed to come back when we had our RFP and I think independent review. And at that point, the RFP is ready to hit the streets, I think, next week for implementation services. So we're likely going to have the materials and information that was included in statute to come back to you. I'm going to speculate in the January timeframe. So after the session has started.
Okay.
Would likely be when we have that available. We had anticipated doing it prior to now, but a couple of different things, including the departure of the previous secretary and transitioning to me as one of the sponsors, because it was Doug Farnham and Deputy Secretary Farnham and Secretary Quinn, kind of delayed getting the RFP out. So we're back on track with that. And should be posted, I believe, somewhere in Cindy, I believe November 7th, the week of November 7th, that will be going out on the street.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. And for the record, my name is Lisa Goff, and I'm the JFO IT consultant. Also included in that was the UI phase 2. That also requires approval from Jitoc when it proceeds. And that RFP was rolled, the phase 1 RFP was pulled and
correct,
reissued as the phase 1, phase 2 RFP after consideration. And but that phase $2 also has the same requirement.
Okay, I understood it differently. I thought it was this year's was released and it was for the future ones that were. So it was
for the phase 1 was released as of last July.
Correct, and then there was. Okay.
And then we were considering phase 2 when we were doing the budget, and we put in a timeline for 23 starting release of that 30 million that was, I think it's 30 million that we put in the budget, but it was starting next July. Release.
Next July.
Oh, after the.
Correct.
But now they've.
But now I know you've pulled back the phase 1 and you've put together.
So let's.
We approved phase 1
a couple of years ago.
Committee, but obviously we have not seen anything about phase 2.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's walk through that project and where it's at, and so we're all on the same page. So the UI modernization was originally proposed in 2 phases. To the legislature. We looked at doing the kind of the outward facing, the constituent piece, and then doing as a second phase, the really big lift of replacing the quote unquote mainframe, right, that does all of the processing. We did then last session, so that was in the first half of the biennium, you approved that. And then in last session, you also were able to support us and approve what was needed for the remainder of the project. So we did go out probably right after the session adjourned with the phase 1 RFP. The responses were such that we actually saw a couple of vendors responded with a full proposal. And when we looked at those that responded with just what was in phase one versus the full proposal, there was a lot to like about taking a step back and going out with a full RFP to get all of the services end to end. And it's not only just from a costing perspective, but a time to market. The delivery time is compressed when we, for some of the vendors, when we look at doing the whole thing together. And then also there's less things to worry about with regards to integration and security, right? We just spent quite a bit of time talking about security, but we don't want a system like UI, which was fraught with fraud attempts early on, to go in without, significant security testing and stuff. So now if we do that in 2 phases, we're looking at double the effort there, right? There's a lot of things so we pulled that back, combined it, issued a request for proposal for a combined phase one, phase two. So in other words, a total project. We'll still probably phase implementation, but do it as a single contract with a single vendor. That RFP closed about a month ago. They've gone through initial selection. It's an active procurement, but it's going through that process. They're working through to get to final selection of that over the course of the next probably month and a half or so. Demos for the finalists, I believe, start next week. So that is progressing. So the reason I'm giving you that is by the time we go through that, do our contracting and have what was released as phase one will take care of any work that we had planned to start prior to 23, which is why I didn't kind of anticipate having to come here for those additional funds prior to what was originally envisioned. So that's why I was only speaking to the ERP portion, which would actually be landing in Jitoc this year.
And if I could just ask for clarification. Now, originally, when phase one was approved, there wasn't a lot of information available. And because it was broken up in phase two, I believe Dan went forward and made the recommendation. Given the fact that a formal review hasn't been done on those projects to the scale that it is normally done, like it was done for DMV, I believe that's why before, it was my impression before the contract would be signed, which now would encompass phase one and phase two, that we would have the opportunity to do that same level of review. So through the as you're selecting the vendor, and as you've gone through the independent review, it was my impression that that would be the point where this committee would have a chance to look at the review that I have done and really consider it as a whole.
Was that the intent? I guess I'm unsure, right? I'm working from.
Well, we were looking, obviously, budgeting, we were looking at releasing the funds and thinking that it was going to be 2 parts. And now, of course, we're talking about one more integrated thing. I think the intent was certainly not as far as releasing funds, but to have at least Jitoc review it once you got a final contract and an independent review, just for this committee to take a look at that, not dependent upon money, because the money was already appropriated, the first 3.5. And then the other was to start in July and thereafter. But wanting to be able to see that once a contract had been finalized or almost finalized with an independent review. So
And before the contract had
and
signed.
before it's actually signed.
Because that is another 30 million versus the 3.5.
Right.
So so that would be likely during the session, does Jitoc tend to meet during the session if needed?
If need be.
Okay.
Yes.
So then, yeah, we can incorporate that as part of our project planning to have that touch point before final signatures.
In terms of the review, is the review done for part 2?
No, I don't have the information yet because they haven't selected a vendor, done the contract, done the independent review.
Okay.
But we've talked about timing the other review and being proactive and communicating so I can get started and really hit the ground running so there's not much of a lag.
Yes.
So
There is a slide in their presentation that gives an update of that.
Yes,
And that coincides with what we're talking about.
sorry, didn't mean to jump ahead.
No,
And obviously,
Yeah.
another concern that everybody had was that once we did start moving on this IT project, that the Department of Labor itself needs to be prepared by having enough backup personnel available to number one, lend credence to the IT project to make sure that.
We know everybody who's unemployed, so they got a roster.
Right, they got a lot of people. I don't know that they would agree with that, but nevertheless,
And they also have some other major projects
going on at the same time. And we just want to make sure that they, as an agency, in addition to ADS, we're prepared to get going on this, and that we don't end up getting going and then they say, oh, we don't have enough people to do this, we got to backfill. We gave them authority to backfill.
Yeah, and I think as you can
As your
see,
slide says,
yeah, they have started, they're embarking on that. And I have sat in, well, I had, as you're aware from testimony in the past, I've had a direct interest
yes,
in the Department of Labor. And so I've still kind of stayed plugged in at the project level. And just anecdotally, what Commissioner Harrington has done to free up like Christine Murphy and dedicate her to this. I have moved from apprehensive to extremely encouraged. This just seems to be like coming together very nicely for them. So, but we will come back when we have those documents, and Commissioner Harrington can answer all your questions about making sure that they're prepared to support it and where they're at on there.
yes, I think this committee should review that irrespective of the money. There's their timelines for the money, but I think taking a look at the final contract and making sure that both parties are ready to go forward.
Okay.
And asking that to happen.
We're glad to do that.
Professor Savella?
Can I go to another project?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I don't see in here an update on the comprehensive child welfare information system.
Oh. I'm gonna have to, I know what's in here.
So I see the DCF,
Yes, so that's
that's not the same
the child welfare.
information system.
Correct, because that one hasn't started yet.
And what is the timeline for that? Do we know to start?
I don't have that one. So that one doesn't, correct me if I'm wrong, that one doesn't carry, that wasn't a direct appropriated one this past session. So that's why I was prepared to speak to. So if you would like a follow-up on the child welfare information, I'd be glad to get that for you.
I personally would.
Okay.
That, yeah, when you have time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Given the timing issue, I'd like to just move quickly to the one project of the list that is listed in red right now. Have an understanding of what's happening, DCF, CDD, and Integrated Information System project.
And that's, I'm on that page, so perfect, Raymond. And that was an interesting one as I was preparing for this, because you'll also notice it is the one that is most complete. It's 89% complete. So the project is working effectively, but I think as you heard beginning of last session, there was some critical resources that both on the DCF side and ADS side that weren't available, and that postponed an implementation or kicked down the road some of the key project dates. And that is something that project is still suffering from, is key resource availability, especially on the DCF side. And so the other piece of it is, and I think you'll see, and this is kind of like in the sub-bullet there under the project status, where there's been this, I guess I would like to describe it as ongoing discovery, meaning that as the more they've seen what a finished application could look like, the greater the scope has grown to, oh, can it do this? Can it do that? Right, type thing. So it's that scope, we use the term creep, that scope creep paired with some of the resource constraints is really what's kept it in a red status, because the schedule has slipped beyond what it was originally intended. But it's still at, we're getting close to finishing it. It's going to carry over into the new year instead of wrapping up at the end of this calendar year, but only by a couple of months.
Of the other items, again, you've got a description of each one. There are a couple that are yellow. Is there anything else, just given the constraints that we have vis-a-vis time today, that you think need to be brought to our attention at this point?
I'd love to bring the ones that are doing really well to your attention.
That's no.
And I think the one that I would want to highlight that is in that category is the DMV systems modernization, the core system modernization. That is, yesterday or 2 days ago, I received an updated project org chart. The vendor has 35 staff on site in Barrie, embedded with DMV folks. All of the key resources from both from DMV, ADS, and the vendor are all identified, filling their roles. Key decisions, like everything from like how we're going to do payment processing, they're all lining up nicely. This project is now has the momentum we like to see for one that's on a path for success, right? You know, you want to see it start and kind of gain momentum that is beyond any one individual. And I also have to give credit, right? You know, DMV has stepped up, under Commissioner Manoli, making sure that her folks identify, working to backfill, because it's always hard, right? When you're doing a project, the person that has the most availability is likely the person you don't want on the project, right? You want the person that's wearing 3 hats at once because they're so critical. And so they've done a really good job of making sure the important people are plugged in, co-located with the vendor, and we're on a path to doing well with that project. So that one we're excited about because that's just, who in Vermont or even, businesses that don't interact with motor vehicles at some point. So
That sounds appropriate.
And they've given me access to all the documentations. I've been reviewing the status reports, reviewing the issue logs, and things come up in projects, but they're all being handled. And interesting, back in June, after my review was released, I had a call from Commissioner Manoli, who said she was going to go back and review the things that I said I'd be looking at, particularly that I saw challenging with this project, and had brought those issues to her project team to be proactive and to see if those areas were covered. So I think there's a lot of good signs moving forward, and it's a great project. So.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. So Lisa and/or Sarah, when these reports, when your analysis and reports are done, in the past, I think we've gotten notification. I don't think we've been receiving, and I mean, given how much you're doing, or at least notification that they're posted. This committee, I think in particular, it would be helpful. I would like to be notified when you do an analysis.
Yeah, we can make sure that the communication plan is going to all the right folks. I think these would have come out at the end of last session.
Okay.
So they're, I don't want to say dated, but we'll just double check and make sure that all the members of Jitoc, and then probably the entire General Assembly sees, because there could be relevance to any legislator in terms of the multiple scopes that are covered in Lisa's IT review.
And all of the issues that I did speak to Representative Sebelius and gave an update to the House Tech Committee on the main points of all the projects, of the things that I found. I'm still learning about my role on the cog of the machine, so I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be the one to tell everybody that it was out. So I assumed that I wasn't the one. So.
Well, if you're sending reports that are technology-based, based on information technology to the House Committee, it probably also ought to be shared with Senate Finance, which is the Senate Committee of Jurisdiction as well.
Okay, so we should discuss that and get a good, make sure. Yes, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
How often is the dashboard updated? It looks like this was last Friday.
Fridays.
Weekly?
Weekly. Every Friday, the project managers post another update to the status reports, and so that carries over into the dashboard.
Okay. And do we have live visibility into that from the legislative side or just from ADS?
No, that's publicly available, so you can even share that with constituents if you want.
Okay.
If it's right off, the link is there, or we've actually, for those of you that had to learn to navigate, right, the Enterprise Project Management Office used to live in its separate site. We've actually pulled them under the Agency Digital Services now, and right at the top of the menu, you can see the EPMO and their dashboards available right there. So a little bit of consolidation to help make it easier to find. One thing I will say is I think we're going to have The ERP project will be a good discussion. It's premature now. When we come back and we talk about that, I think there's a lot of things that we're going to want to consider and talk through on that one, because that one is a significant project for how the state operates.
Mr. Chair, may I ask another question? It's a short one. So in terms of your role, the secretary role, and deputy secretary, so can you tell us, so what's the capacity like in the secretary's office? So.
Oh, you mean me as an army of one at the moment?
That's, yeah. And so, and what are the plans there, if you can share?
Nothing I can share at this point. I mean, we've had some just discussions, but I have, for personal reasons, I also have a schedule of events in my life that will factor into that. At this point, Secretary Quinn was very, very wise in setting up the leadership team that he did. It seems large at times when you look at our org chart, right? And I showed that earlier, and there's a lot of exempt leaders there. But that has allowed me to be able to fulfill both roles, I think, relatively effectively since he's left, and not had things slip through the cracks, because I've been relying on that leadership team. So right now we're in a pretty good place that we can continue to move forward without seeing the secretary's office impede any of these projects or any of the key initiatives, or, our attention to things like cybersecurity.
Okay, so then am I hearing you say that at this time there is no plan to add that second person back into?
We just haven't had those conversations.
Okay, the conversations have not happened.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I anticipate that would be something after the election.
Great.
So being presumptive.
We have, by the way count, about 2.5 minutes left before our mandatory time to adjourn. And there, I just want to raise the issue that I raised at the beginning of the meeting today, whether or not this regional dispatch working group legislative mandate is something that should fall under the purview of Jitoc to at least be aware of. And I think I made a copy, and Mike, if you want to distribute the copy to the members here, and for Senator Pearson, I'm not sure if he's on, but for Senator Pearson and Senator Chittenden, it's been sent to them by email. In the big bill last time, there was a mandate to create, under the Commissioner of Public Safety, a working group on the new regional dispatch model. And this is dispatch for emergency services, first responders, law enforcement, and so on. And we've talked about it, at least very briefly at some time in past years, that this whole, ranging from E911 to how we dispatch emergency vehicles, to what the locals do, to what the state police do, that certainly from a funding standpoint, it's been all over the board, in that you've got some municipalities that are doing their own dispatching, others are being dispatched by the state police, others are being dispatched by sheriff's offices, and the whole issue of the communications, the technology, and how all this is done is a major issue. And this group was designed to provide a written report to the Governor and General Assembly regarding this new regional dispatch model, and it's unclear what that model is. I guess it's going to be included in the report, and the funding for it, as well as the timeline and transition funding, and then the workload that would result at the 2 state police dispatch centers for a fully operational regional dispatch model. And this group, working group, consists of people from all of the various types of agencies that are involved. They are doing a report. The report is due, I believe, on December 1. And depending upon what that report suggests, there is an essential IT element associated with all of this. And there are concerns that I'm not sure are going to be addressed or where they're going to be addressed. But I suspect that this is something that this committee ought to be both aware of and consider. But I want to hear from the rest of the committee as to whether or not you have any opinion at this point. And I realize this is a very brief look, and I'm almost asking for your gut feel as to whether or not you believe that this falls within the purview of Jitoc or not.
I would think it falls in the purview of Jitoc, if indeed they're going to be talking about some kind of a regional consolidated information technology system that's going to connect all these folks together. That I would think this committee would at least want to be aware of what their plans are, whether they manipulate those plans or influence those plans or not. That would just depend on what's being suggested, I think. But I would think it would be something this committee would be curious about. Well, more than curious, want some kind of oversight.
I would tend to agree about the regional IT system. I think, the regional dispatch is a part of a larger public safety issue. So, I mean, in terms of the regional IT issues, I do think it would be something for us to at least be aware of and hear about.
I mean, the issues that we've talked about in the past, we've talked briefly about E911, for example, I believe at one point, and the issues there are, is there appropriate failover? Is there backup? What happens if one regional center is down? Is there connectivity and the ability to deal with a system failure, for example? Is the system secure? And there, the question that there's a difference between the, let's say, voice systems, which we have not gotten into a great deal, as opposed to the IT systems that connect things together. And there are some gray areas in terms of oversight, I would think.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with you. I would also note that when we're looking at 911, we also have, major funding and capacity issues, staffing issues, which are, a part of that whole thing. And I'm not sure that would be, and this is why I think this problem has been wicked to really solve. It's kind of really multi-layered. So.
Well, I think as a first point, we have a December 1 date that a report is going to come out. I think we should make sure that the members of this committee get a look at that report. And then perhaps depending upon the report this may be something we put on as a kind of an introductory issue at our next meeting, and perhaps invite the chair of that committee to join us.
Yeah, Senator, I am going to have to run, but
We're all gonna run.
I just would love if we could try and schedule, if there's going to be another meeting before the session, or meetings, if we could try and schedule those as soon as possible.
Agreed.
Okay.
Anything else that we need to cover today in the time that we don't have left?
Should we have another meeting before session?
I think it depends upon the issues that we have to, if any, to cover. At this point, I think we have covered the major issues that I certainly had on my agenda. I think we communicate in writing back and forth between us over the next several days, and then determine if we are in fact going to need another meeting. This regional dispatch thing is the one issue. And again, if that goes over into January, the world isn't going to end. I gather there is a request for money that's going to come out of this particular document that this working group is going to create. But again, I think we have until the beginning of the session also to deal with that.
So the only reason that I would advocate for us to hear about that before the session is to have Marty available. That is the only reason.
Crucial memory is very helpful.
Well, that is true.
Yeah.
So I could work on 911 also.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good point. Okay. On that note, are we ready to adjourn?